Hello, welcome to Podcast on Infinite Earths, the unofficial DC Studios podcast. I'm your host, Porter.
And I'm your host, Tyson.
And today we're going to be talking about Creature Commandos Episode 3. So, Tyson, what were your initial thoughts?
Honestly, I think this is my favorite episode yet. Cheers to the Tin Man. I
Yeah.
think was incredibly well done. I think I'm just blown away by how quickly they were able to attach me to the character of G.I. Robot. He seemed to be mostly comic relief up until this point, but I felt honestly some real sympathy once they kind of delved into his backstory and honestly made his demise that much more tragic.
Yeah, it was fun to get that backstory, and it seems like they don't even know how he was made. He kind of just like shows up because like even the scientist guy was like, I don't know what happened, or I don't know how he got made, and that's okay.
Right, like it was just some sort of impressive technology, but I mean, as comic book fans, we're all willing to accept the ah, good enough for me.
Totally, totally. Just like, yeah, it happens. One pattern I thought was kind of cool. I wonder if they're going to do each episode another backstory for each character because the previous episode was kind of all about the bride and her upbringing, and then this episode was all about G.I. Robot and how he came to be
Mm,
where he was. I wonder if each episode they'll just kind of do like a mini backstory thing, kind of like the TV show Watchmen, where like each episode it would
mm.
just like go back in time and just like give you the backstory on a random character.
Yeah, and that would honestly be kind of cool. I feel like it's maybe necessary at this point when so many of these characters, I mean, at least in my case, just haven't even been heard of before.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it definitely raises the stakes when you know like kind of what's going on in their lives previous to this and kind of how they got to this point in the first place. If you think about like the chronological story of episode 2, truly not that much happened. They like arrived at the mansion, they found the bride and I'm forgetting the fish lady. I can't remember her name. And they literally took them back to the castle and fought.
Right. Like as far as like present day
Yeah,
story,
like
not a
not
ton
too
has
much happened.
happened.
They spent a lot of time in the past, which I appreciated. I thought it was necessary, and I'm gonna be real. I really love the scene where they got the military collector taking him to the socialist
Oh my
event, and
gosh.
GI just murdered everybody.
I know the
Um,
second he was like, yeah, like we taking you to a group of people that want to like see our country in a better place. I was like,
you
oh
saw that coming.
no. Yeah, I was like, oh man.
I thought it was going to happen earlier at the press conference they had, post World War II, and the announcer was like, "No, we haven't checked everybody's IDs. I mean, why would we need to do that?" And GI was like, "That sounds like something a Nazi would
Right.
say."
I know I was worried he was gonna murder everyone there, but he didn't.
But I guess it was only a matter of time. I like how they gave him like a very clear sense of some like kind of free will, right? Where like, of course, his prime objective is to murder Nazis, but he does feel like camaraderie to an extent, however much a robot like him can feel with his platoon. Like he likes being one of the boys. He likes being the Tin Man, right? One of the gang, and to an extent misses them.
Yeah, that was very like touching part when he was like, yeah, but like if you didn't have to kill Nazis, like what would you want? And he was like, yeah, I want to be with these guys, and he clearly had felt the most purpose when he was with them as much as a robot could. But
Right.
yeah, he it was quite the backstory. How do you feel about them giving you all this backstory and then he dies by the end of the episode?
Uh, I was honestly kind of torn up about that. Not that I was disappointed with their decision, but it was hard to like get kind of attached to him and maybe feel where he's coming from and that like it's not just killing Nazis to him. He's really not just there for comedic effect. I mean, his effect is comedic, don't get me wrong,
Yeah,
but kind of those final words where he was talking to Nina, the fish lady,
Yeah.
and was just like, I'm glad that we got to kill Nazis together. Like they were sort of forming a bit of a bond. That hit a little too hard. I'm gonna be real.
Yeah, I mean, you got like he calls her like my friend Nina, right? Like he's not just like
Yeah,
Nina. So he like obviously has a concept of like what a friend would be, which makes you go like, oh crap, like he's not just like a cold killing machine. Like because the first episode kind of gives off the vibe of like he's the Terminator for Nazis, right?
right.
But in this, he's really like I don't know. They did give a lot of emotions to him, despite him being a robot, which is really
Right.
fun.
And I think Nina was the best character for him to connect to because most of the other monsters are just kind of cold and callous or just removed in their own way. And I hope they do a bit of backstory on her because she seems so kind of sweet and kind. Like she doesn't fit in that monster sense.
Yeah, you're right. Not at all. I mean, I don't picture her murdering people, like like
No.
we haven't seen her in combat yet. We haven't seen her really do anything monster like. I mean, the only
Right.
classification for her being a monster is her appearance.
Right. Like she's technically not human, but she's not a murderer, at least from what we've seen so far, right?
Right. I mean, you have that part where Weasel takes down Cersei and Dr. Phosphorus is like burning her face off, and you're just like, holy crap, like
Yeah.
that's intense. And
Well, and that line that Bride gave immediately after that, where she's just all like, I mean, you wanted a team of monsters. This is what you get, right? And that hit, man.
yeah, that's a good point. Clearly, like this is what you asked for. It's like, don't be shocked about it, right? It was kind of what she was telling him.
Yeah. What did you think of maybe a bit of a cliffhanger at the end when Cersei, I thought she was dead. I'm going to be real after
Oh,
Phosphorus like face palmed her, but
same.
after she just says like you've doomed us all. Like what do you think she was talking about? Where do you think they might be going with this?
I wonder if there's some sort of like conspiracy behind the kingdom, like they're secretly like worshiping the devil or like something that's like a big threat. I mean, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe they're like mutating people, like just something terrible that the world doesn't know about.
But like that classic, the maybe like innocent isn't as innocent as they seem. Like the princess is actually nefarious in some sense, and Cersei might be like an unlikely ally in the end.
Right. I have zero clue where they're going to go with it. But yeah, you're right. It might be a case of like Cersei's actually trying to do the right thing, just in the wrong way.
Right.
And the world is oblivious to what's going on in that country. So they just are like, yeah, let's protect it. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun little cliffhanger. You're right.
Yeah. Once again, super in love with the show. Looking forward to more.
Totally. So I'm curious. There's some news. James Gunn is talking about how he's wanting to structure the DC universe. And he was talking about having the DC universe not be so much like Marvel, where it's a single storyline that's like everything's a little connected and it all leads to one road kind of thing. And how he likened it more to Star Wars, where you can have these stories and these different TV shows that don't necessarily have to be watched, but you can have fun watching Creature Commandos and you don't have to watch everything.
Right. Like it adds depth to it if you want to like build it as a cohesive story. But yeah, he mostly mentioned it being like universe building rather than like kind of chronological story building.
Yeah. And I think he had said something like along the lines of not every vibe works for every character, right? Like you're not going to have monsters and all of that show up in like a Batgirl project, maybe.
Right.
Like it sounds like he's wanting to keep it like you said, universe building. He keeps everything loosely connected in the sense that they're all like in the same dimension, but they don't have to connect. Like you're not going to get at the end of Creature Commandos, oh, Darkseid's coming. I doubt that.
Right. Like it doesn't have to be canonical, it doesn't have to be big and epic. It can just be a good story inside of this DC universe. I
Yeah.
like how he compared it to how comic books have like different artists and writers with different takes on the same subjects. And I feel like that's such a proper way to describe this because that is how it should be approached. A lot of fans get really concerned with canonization and how things like are supposed to be and should fit into this world, but I think like the story of it, the idea of it, like there's a lot of art to be had. So I think that's brilliant to have different formats like the cartoons, the live action, different takes on different stories. I'm just appreciative of him leaning into that.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Because, yeah, I mean, you might have comic books people might really like Blue Beetle comics, and they're like, this is the kind of stuff I want to watch, and I love this. And even if there's Batman comics coming out, like I'm not super interested in that. And that comic book reader doesn't have to read everything to get the vibe.
Right. Right. I mean, this is definitely something we touched on last time, and it's what I believe will be one of DC's strengths as they continue to build out their universe. I feel like that'll also make it easier for their earlier projects to fit in. They don't necessarily have to be all like, oh, that was a rough start, let's forget about it. They can recognize maybe it wasn't as popular, but it is still like an acceptable rendition because it will be just different versions, different takes of like these really cool characters and stories that have developed over the years.
Yeah, like I know Peacemaker season 2 is happening, and they are making that Peacemaker is quote unquote canon with the new DC universe. I feel like they're not going to have to do a bunch of crazy like canonization writing to fit that in. They can kind of just be like, it just is in the canon, like
Right.
I feel like I don't need a big explanation.
Well, right. And they can trust the fans. They don't have to like hold their hands, right? To like, make some make leaps is too strong a word, but just some logical conclusions about how you got there, right? I do appreciate even if they aren't keeping, things like strictly canon. I like how he was a fan of hopping from different, I guess, formats. He was talking about how the man who voices Rick Flag Senior, yeah,
Yeah.
Frank Grillo, will be playing him in live action in the second season of Peacemaker, which I think is exciting. I like how they'll have that interaction. He might be some sort of big bad looking for vengeance for his son. I'm excited to see how he shows up, but I like that they're trying to keep some level of conformity around that, where it'll be like, oh yeah, he's in the cartoon, voices his character, and then you can see. I mean, he honestly looks kind of similar to the cartoon
He
character
totally
anyway.
does.
So
Yeah, I remember James Gunn saying that when he first announced it was like, yeah, I'd like to have actors be the same in like animation and live action. And it'll be fun to have that come to fruition. Yeah, I agree. He looks very similar to him, and it'll be really cool to see his role in Peacemaker because you're right. Yeah, it might be a revenge story. That'd be really cool.
yeah, right. I'm really interested in this character because he does seem like the person who would have birthed. I mean, Rick Flag himself, right? Like a really tough and patriotic kind of individual. But in the cartoon, he mentions that like, my son was a better man than I. Like he almost seems like a darker version of him, which
Yeah,
would make for a fantastic opposition. Villain feels like too strong a word because Peacemaker is an anti-hero at times. But
right.
but yeah, I feel like that would be a great source of conflict.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some other news that's blowing up is DC or Warner Brothers announced that they're going to start making a Clayface movie,
Yeah.
which is crazy. I wouldn't have thought that'd be the case, but I'm here for it.
I mean, yeah, it honestly is maybe as surprising to me as when they announced they were coming out with a Kite Man show.
Right?
It's all maybe similar spin-offs of like the of that around that series, but starting with like the Harley Quinn where they kind of knocked it out of the park with that kind of adult animation. I think the brilliance of like taking these maybe more niche characters is that like we've said a thousand times, like you can build them out. because there isn't a whole lot of backstory or canonization to worry about, and you can kind of just like freeform flow with it. I mean, I don't think in any one of the comics, Clayface was a dramatic dude, right? Was like a theater aficionado, was like how they played him out in the Harley Quinn show.
Definitely not to that level. Like he was an actor, but he was definitely not as traumatic as he is.
Like they made it next level, and he's so annoying and it's brilliant. He's just such a fun and funny character. I'm curious if they're going to make this into kind of a musical type uh show, right? Like if they'll have him like singing a ton or make it like kind of built around that being the theme, right?
That would be actually really interesting if they made that a musical. Just pull a joke or two.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. The guy they have set to write it, Mike Flanagan, is known for horror, which is funny because we talked a lot about that last week.
Yeah.
He directed Hush, which is a very popular movie. He directed Doctor Sleep, which is a sequel to The Shining, which is really, really good. And he also wrote and was a showrunner behind some TV shows like The Haunting of Hill House, which I watched a little bit of. Like he's a very talented creative, and
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I'm excited to see what kind of script he'd come up with for Clayface. I don't think they have a director yet, but Clayface does could lend itself to a more horror aspect because it's a guy whose body is like falling apart. Like it could be something like The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, where it's like kind of that body horror, like, oh my gosh, like his body's turning like really gross and it's turning into clay.
Yeah, like really grotesque. They could totally lean into that. And once again, an interesting take when they most recently came out with this just silly, goofy character.
Yeah, you're right. It'll be so different, just like having this really goofy version of him. And then what if they came out with like a horror version? It'd be like, what the heck? But I think it'll be fun. I like Clayface. The new Batman the Caped Crusader show, the new animated one, did an episode where where its villain was Clayface, and it is like really, really good. The original Batman animated series, you can kind of watch them out of order. Like you don't have to get context. They're very episodic, but it's cool. Like that episode, I watched it and I was like, man, that's probably like one of the best like Clayface stories I've ever heard. And then hearing about this movie got me excited because maybe they're just like, oh yeah, like this villain is really cool. And I'm kind of excited that they're branching out into different villains like the Penguin, Clayface, rather than just sticking with Joker, which they know will bring people. They're kind of taking a little bit of risk.
Well, and I like that they are leaning into kind of that maybe more realism or dark side of the villains. That they a lot of these have just been very almost like PG, just goofy 60 villains kind of vibes, right? So when Penguin is like a gangster and like has like a really dark backstory and like does some really awful things to make his way to the top, that's so different than this little Danny DeVito ordering around Penguin henchmen. Like, right? Like it's just completely. So I would love if they would do that for Clayface. Is that something that you enjoyed about their rendition of Clayface in that episode? Like, what was his backstory like?
If I remember right, it was kind of like a mystery of like this actor has gone missing. Batman's trying to figure out what's going on, and then he uncovers like there's this serum or some experiment happened that turns someone into clay, and he's like kind of slowly figuring out that Clayface is like on a revenge plot.
Oh man.
It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, speaking of Batman, they're coming out with that new. Is it a movie or show where they'll have kind of the Batman Robin arc?
Yeah, with Batman Brave and the Bold, it'll be cool to see Robin in a live action because we haven't had that since George Clooney Batman. You know,
And that was
it was rough.
not. It was rough.
Yeah, not good. So I wonder. I'd be curious to see them take another crack at it because I mean, besides the '60s Batman, there's only been one other like live action Robin. And unless you count Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character in Dark Knight Rises, he wasn't really a Robin, but they were kind of like teasing that
They were
around.
hinting at it like there might have, if there had been like a fourth, like that could have been a thing. And I feel like they could have played into that well, right? Like he had a decent arc, and I liked where they kind of left that. But yeah, he was never officially Robin per se. He never put on the tights.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, it'll be super interesting to see how they decide to go about Robin in this new one. So yeah, it's been a fun week. I'm excited for next week. Creature Commandos has been super fun. I think it's a total of 7 episodes, so we're approaching the midpoint.
Okay, right on. Hopefully, some more backstory on maybe characters like Dr. Phosphorus or Nina.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see. Well, this has been Podcast on Infinite Earths, an unofficial DC Studios podcast. We try to release episodes every Monday morning so you can listen to them at the start of your week. And thank you for listening. Catch you next week.
See you next week.